Thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to introduce to you Dr. Annette Karmiloff-Smith. She is really known around the world for her contributions in our understanding of human developmental cognitive science. And she has also really helped us to understand how typical development goes awry in neurodevelopmental disorders and also genetic disorders. She received her doctorate from the University of Geneva, and she trained with Piaget, and we'll be asking her about that later. And she also went from her doctorate then to a number of appointments around the world. I'll just mention a few. She was at the Max Planck Institute. We actually got to know one another when she was visiting Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh when I was in the Pittsburgh area. And then she spent the majority of her career as a career scientist and unit head at the University of College London. And then only recently moved to Birkbeck Center for Brain and Cognitive Development at the University of London. Annette has published 13 books and over 300 articles, commentaries, and chapters. And these publications, many have been translated into almost two dozen different languages: Finnish, Arabic, Hebrew, Chinese. How many of those have you read? We'll find out about that too. So I think that all these different translations of her work really are a testament to how she's influenced the field of developmental cognitive science around the world. And probably, and one of my favorite, but her most influential book, I would have to say, is Beyond Modularity, a developmental perspective on cognitive science. It's been cited nearly 4,000 times, and it also won the British Psychological Society's Book Award in 1995. It was published in 1992, but it's still having a tremendous influence on the field even today. And it's really a critical analysis of bringing together theories of Piaget and Fodor in terms of thinking about biological constraints on the system and how that interacts with the cognitive flexibility that the system has. Her work on really developmental disorders and genetic disorders have strongly argued against us viewing developmental disorders from an adult neuropsychological approach, many times referring to the difference between the developed and developing brain of the individual, and just developed and developing is very important and key to understanding how, when a system is delayed during a time when other systems are developing, it's going to have an impact on them in a cascading way. And so this has been very important in thinking about how developmental deficits and how a deviation in development is going to occur or may occur. You've received numerous awards and honors. Annette has at least 3 honorary doctorates, so we could call her Dr. Karmiloff-Smith. And it's also the case that I wanted to mention a special award that she received from the Queen of England. And it's a CBE. For those of you who aren't familiar with British honors, this is the Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, and it's an honor awarded as part of the Queen's official birthday celebration. And she actually shares this with Kate Winslet and Colin Firth, and also Sting. So Annette's contributions have really gone beyond academia. They have also included other areas, and you've contributed at the UN, being a simultaneous interpreter there. Annette spent time in actually a Palestinian refugee camp before becoming a doctoral student with Piaget. And she's been a regular consultant for radio and television, so this is an old hat for her.
Oops.
And I must say that she's truly a valued colleague, but also a valued mentor And I know that she is a very valued mother and grandmother and wife, and she's especially a dear friend. So we're very pleased to have you here today.
Thank you.
And we welcome you to This Is Your Life. So I just want to say we appreciate that you're allowing us to voyeuristically look at the experiences and the individuals that influenced your life and your work. And I wanted to just begin with your childhood and start there and just ask you, what was it like being a little girl in your household growing up?
Ooh. Well, I had a really weird beginning. My father was Jewish, and all his family were touchy-feely and emotional. My mother was blonde, blue-eyed, you'd never think so looking at me, and very cold. Her family were very distant, they didn't touch you. And I didn't know who I was. Was I this sort of very emotional person, or was I, like my mother, more cold? She never actually hugged me, ever, during my childhood.
Wow.
And slowly I found myself in between those two extremes. School, it was interesting. It was a very, I say, Protestant type of school. So I was away from the Jewish influence there. I was good at maths, but I thought that led only to accountancy. So I definitely didn't want to become an accountant. The French teacher was gorgeous, and he really taught me French in a way that made me love France. So I decided that languages was the way to get away from my environment and my upbringing. My father thought that boys went to university and girls got married, so that was tough. Yeah. I had to fight that a lot and say I wanted a career. And that's how I studied languages and became an interpreter.
So I romanticize about foreign languages, and particularly being an interpreter. And at the UN, given that I live in New York, what was that like? It's a challenge at first, but it's like anything. We all multitask. So I'm listening to one language and speaking another, and after a while it becomes really boring. So you're not allowed to have your own thoughts. So if somebody says something that you don't agree with, you still have to say, I think that. Also, you go from one topic to another. So I might have been doing, say, the height of bumpers for European, what do you call them, bumpers in American? The things on cars. Oh, bumper stickers.
Oh, yeah,
right,
okay. The height of bumpers for European standardization one week, mental health the next week, nuclear physics the week after that. So you never really have time to get a deep understanding of anything. It's very superficial. I went into it thinking I would become multi-knowledgeable, but it's not true. You just get the surface. And after a while, I got very, very frustrated by repeating other people's thoughts. I had some of my own that I wanted to express.
Right. So then how did you transition into psychology? From that?
It's an interesting story. When you're an interpreter for the UN, you are on standby sometimes. So you've got a conference that gets cancelled, but you have to stand by. And as soon as you call in the morning and they say you're free, you can do what you like for the rest of that day. And I used to spend a lot of time in the university bookshop. And I was looking at psychiatry, actually. I was thinking maybe I'll study medicine. I wasn't sure where I was going from interpreting. And of course, psychology and psychiatry are very close to each other on the shelves. And I would pick up a book, and it was on the intelligence of the child. I think, well, quite interesting. And always on the back there was a picture of this man called Piaget. And, you know, I saw it quite often. I took one of the books out once because I was interested in child development as well. I was pregnant at the time. And one day this man came in, and I thought, wait a minute, I've seen him somewhere. And it was Piaget. Oh. And I followed him out of the bookshop across the road.
You were stalking Piaget?
I was stalking him. I went across the road and I audited his class. Now, I had thought psychology, and the reason I hadn't chosen psychology, I thought it was questionnaires and reaction time. I had no idea it had any further depth. And I was mind blown. He just was so charismatic. And he told, I must tell you this story because it's really funny. He was telling the class about object permanence, and he gave the description of his son, Laurent, watching a ball across the room, and it went under the sofa, and he stopped looking. And Piaget told that as if it had happened the night before. He chuckled away as he told it. At that point, Laurent was 54 years old. So Piaget had this love of small facts that had big meaning.
Yeah.
And that autumn I signed up for psychology. The rest is history.
So before we talk a little bit more about your experience with Piaget, I want to transition into how did you come to spend time in the refugee camps? How did that occur? And what was that experience like?
My first husband was an economist, and he was asked to go to the Middle East to try and set up an Arab common market. It was doomed to failure before he went. So we went for 2 years to Beirut. And I wanted to do something interesting, useful. So I went to the UNESCO Institute of Education. It was UNESCO UNRWA, actually, and said, is there anything I can do? And they said, well, we need to have better training for our teachers on the camps for child psychology.
Right.
So I started visiting every morning, and I wrote some teacher training documents which were translated into Arabic. I had no experience of teaching, so it was pretty dangerous, really. Anyway, the way I set it up was I asked the question, what is intelligence? And they had to reply, and I was pretty sure they'd give me rote learning. And then I took them through gradually, telling them about all I knew about child development, and I kept asking the same question, what is intelligence? Hoping by the end they'd talk about flexibility, creativity, and so forth.
Yeah.
And not facts. And I tried to persuade UNRWA, UNESCO, to put more money into infant education because most of it was going into the secondary education. But it was an experience. I learned about poverty. You can read about poverty. It's another thing to experience it every morning. And then in the afternoons, I was in the diplomatic circles and everything, and I had this terrible,
disconnect
trying to hold these two things apart. It was hard.
Oh. I think the question we all want to know is, what was it like to train with Piaget?
Okay. He was very charismatic. He made me really understand the breadth of human development. Forget the stages. All of that is really unimportant. It's his epistemology that's important. But as a man, he was extremely obstinate. So, for instance, we would do a piece of research during the year, and whenever it was ready for publication, Piaget's name was first, and then the female names came second, and the male names came third. And I said to him, but Jean-Paul, who was my colleague at that point, did more work this year because I was focusing on my thesis. He should go next. And Piaget wouldn't change it. He was quite sexist about the way he dealt with women. Women were called by their first name, men were called by their surnames. There was a real division. The other thing was that if you had a so he would write out his chapter. He always wrote by hand from, I think, 8 in the morning till 1:20 when he went for a walk with his bicycle. He didn't ride it, he pushed it along. And he thought. He had great thoughts during that. So when he sent you the chapter, and if you had any comments, he would never change his text, but he would put in a footnote, one of us thinks X, the other thinks Y, for the reader to decide. And it was a peculiar, we never read all the literature going on. I hadn't heard of the journals before I went to an international conference. We read Aristotle, Plato, Piaget, we read Vygotsky. That was about it. It was a very narrow view, but a very rich one. So complicated mixtures of things. But I learned so much from him. I mean, it was an extraordinary experience. I've never regretted it. And then on Mondays, they had the Center for Epistemology, for Genetic Epistemology. And there again, there was a division. Experimentalists on one side, theoreticians on the other, and they weren't supposed to mix either. And of course, we violated that, and particularly I did. So it was an experience, marked my life.
So it was around this time that you had to give a pretty big keynote.
Yes. So I was in this very closed Genevan setting, and I was in Mimi Sinclair's office, and she got a telegram, so it was telling you how long ago it was, there was no email then, saying, are you going to come and give this keynote address? And she said in a loud voice, no, I don't want to go. What about you, Jean-Paul, who was my colleague? And he said, I hate speaking in English. What about Annette? And I hadn't even finished my thesis then. And she said, oh, yes, what about Annette? So off I went to give my very first talk outside the office. as a keynote address. I didn't know which way to put the overheads. You know, I'd never done that before. And it launched my career, so what can I say?
Well, it did launch your career, and you landed in a number of places we've mentioned before. Max Planck, you spent some time at UC Berkeley, we mentioned CMU. How did you land in these different places? How did that all begin to
I wanted to get
fall into
out of
place?
Geneva, and it wasn't obvious with family responsibilities, etc., how to do that. So with Max Planck, I used to go once a month for a couple of days and interact with their developmental psycholinguists, because they had a very small group of, for development. Where else? Carnegie Mellon, because my second husband, Mark Johnson, was a professor there, and I went out on sabbatical for nearly 18 months, actually, and that's where I finished off Beyond Modularity. We might have stayed, actually. It was touch and go, but in the end we both came back to England. Where else have I been? Berkeley was an invitation, and I came here, very close to here, for 3 months, and interacted with people like Dan Slobin, Susan Irvin Tripp, etc., and the philosophers there. I used to go and argue with Dreyfus and people like that, so that was fun. Searle as well.
Well, I mentioned my favorite of your publication was Beyond Modularity, but I know each of us, we have one of our favorite publications. Do you have one that comes to mind, or that?
Yeah, I have two, I think, which I can't choose between. One is something I published in 1998, and it's called Development Itself is the Cue to Understanding Developmental Disorders. I think I spelt out there really my position on why development is so important in understanding the brain, behavior, everything. The other is a more recent one in PNAS, and I've forgotten its title. It's something like Genetic and Environmental Vulnerabilities, or something like that. Because there I brought in the environment, and I don't think I had very clearly in the past. Mm-hmm. So I'm really, really interested in how the environment changes the brain, changes the way parent and child interact, and so forth.
So I also know it's the case that with every conversation that we have, no matter how brief, or every experiment we perform, every individual whose work we read, they influence our work. And over the years, are there certain individuals, you've mentioned Piaget,
yes.
but individuals that you feel have truly influenced your work and your life?
Yeah, so Piaget, obviously,
yeah,
the biggest influence of all. Seymour Papert, a second one. He used to come to the Center for Genetic Epistemology in Geneva quite regularly. And then I came out to MIT for various visits. He made me realize how important it was to spell out in great detail, when you're writing computer programs, the intricacies of change. I think verbal theorizing, it's very easy to get away with murder, so to speak, because you're not constrained in the same way. But when you have to write a program, you really are. And Seymour made me very conscious of how important that approach was. And then Jeff Ellman came into my life. We, as you know, wrote a book together with Liz Bates, Mark Johnson, my husband, and others, called Rethinking Innateness. And there again, we used computer modeling to really constrain our thinking. And I've done 2 courses. I did one in Lisp at Yale, and I wrote a program called Annette in Lisperland, which was very funny. And then I learned T-Learn at UCSD. So I think computationally, I had influences from these people that were very important. And Liz Bates influenced me a lot as well. I really regret that she died, because we used to email each other very, very frequently on both theoretical matters and about how to lose weight, how to get rid of wrinkles and things like that. So a very nice relationship that I miss a lot.
Yeah, no, Liz is a legend herself. Mm-hmm. I know that you have regularly consulted for radio and television, and I was just curious how that came to be and how that experience was.
Interesting. I got contact, when I was at the Institute of Child Health, I was contacted by a group who were trying to do a program on babies. And I first of all said no, because I hate those kind of I Love Babies programs. But it wasn't like that. I met them and they said they really wanted to tell the story from the baby's point of view. And the kind of things they did, which I found really exciting, was they had just the baby's hand on the whole screen, or just mother's lips on the whole screen. And they were really trying to see what the baby paid attention to. And so I agreed, and I wrote the script for it and the voiceover. And I was there when they were filming. So that was how it started. Then I got contacted by a nappy company, Pampers. And I said, no way, I'm not going to be involved in a nappy company. But they too wanted to do interesting things. They wanted to write booklets for parents that they were going to send out free of charge to anyone who registered on their website about child development, about sleep, about sibling rivalry, etc. And I wrote those with my daughter, Kira, my younger daughter. She wanted to make some money, and she writes very well, so it was perfect. And it led to various other things. I mean, and from then on, at first I was very sort of dismissive of working with media. Now I see that it's a great challenge and one that we have to come to terms with, and that we owe to the public. You know, we're paid by our universities, etc. We need to give back. And I think the challenge is to be simple without being simplistic. And that's much harder than talking to peers. I'm sure I see people nodding, but I mean, it really is a challenge that we have a debt to face, and one I now enjoy. I don't feel embarrassed about it anymore. The first time the Baby It's You book came out that went with this film program, there was a pink baby on the front, and all my colleagues teased me, and I thought, I'm never going to do this again. But actually now I'm proud of it, so one changes one's attitude.
It was very influential. Speaking of babies, though, I have met your two lovely, lovely daughters, and they now have children of their own. But I think my question is, how have you and how do you continue to balance your personal life from your academic life?
I think it's hard. I think you have to face the fact that it's going to be hard and sort of face that head on. So there are several rules I have. One is you have to learn to say no. And I found that quite hard. I was sort of somebody who said yes easily, because you can't be Superwoman. You have to divide your time. When they were small, I used to spend my days with them. The students would come to the house rather than me going into the university. I would put them to bed, sing them lullabies, read them, and then I would literally run to my study.
Wow. Yeah.
And I forgot sleep for a long time, and I think we need to take that into account. So say no and get enough sleep. But also don't think that you have to be perfect in either side. You have to accept that there are things where you're constrained and find a balance between it. But there's a third thing, I think, that's really important, and that is finding time for you. So not just for the children, not just for your career. So I sometimes take 5 minutes and I paint my nails bright red, and that's my relaxation, my me time. I also exercise quite a lot. So, and I think that's important too. If you plan a lot, you can do it, but it isn't easy. It's a real challenge.
So I'll have to say 5 years ago, I flew from New York to London for the weekend for one of the best parties of my entire life. Would you be willing to share that celebration with us?
So I was 75 years ago, and I wanted to do something special. I didn't want just the usual couples party and everything. So I decided to invite all the women who had marked my life right through time. And so people came from, there was a lady of 104, you remember her?
Yeah.
She was my mother's best friend's elder sister. Her best friend had died. So she knew me in the 30s. Then there was the 40s, where infant school, etc., and I had a couple of friends there. The 50s and 60s, when I was an interpreter, and then from psychology, and people came from all over the world. It was amazing. I mean, you came from New York, people came from Israel, from Spain, and everyone had to wear a little sticker, and it gave the decade they knew me in, their first name, and what was the other thing? Where they came from. And I sat there at one point and I watched the 1940s talking to the 1980s, and it was just wonderful. And I have a series of extraordinary photographs. And there was the one that we took the whole group and everybody is sort of doing this. And it was just extraordinary. And people told all sorts of terribly naughty stories about me. My daughter told one, I remember.
Do you want to share that with us?
Well, it was about me trying to take the hairs off my legs and getting stuck to the bath with some sticky stuff, and having locked the door, I couldn't get to the door. And she told this story and everybody was weeping with laughter. I was very embarrassed. But it was just an extraordinary experience to have all these women who had marked my life in very different ways, all talking to each other and getting to know each other. Most of us got very drunk, but the evening went, so we started at lunchtime, we went on till way into the
Yes,
wee
some
hours.
of us went on very, very late. It was very lovely, and it was a wonderful
special
experience with so many exceptional women, including yourself. You've really had an amazing career, and I know that there is never going to be a time that you retire, and so I want to hear about what you have. We've heard about the first half of your life. I want to hear now a little bit about the next half that's to come.
Tricky, because I don't know how long I'll be around. I retired officially at 65. You had to in England. And we had a party, and my grandson said to me, "When are you going to stop?" And I said, "Soon." And he said, no, when? Because he wanted precision. And I said, "When I'm 93 and a half." And off he went, completely satisfied. He got the precision he needed. So when people ask me the question you've just asked me, I always say when I'm 93 and a half. I've just got a big grant to do some work on babies with Down syndrome, looking to identify protective and risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, because in Down syndrome, the gene for the beta amyloid plaques is actually on chromosome 21, and so it's overexpressed throughout development in Down syndrome, and therefore it's a very interesting model for looking at it. And that grant lasts 5 years, so beyond that, if I'm still enthusiastic, and I think I will be, I want to continue for as long as I can, for as long as I get grants and have great students, and because my students have been fantastic over the years. I also want to write poetry. I started writing poetry at Berkeley when I came here on the sabbatical, and I enjoyed it immensely. I joined a women's poetry club. So I'll continue doing that, definitely. I might write a funny book. As a little sideline, I have 1 or 2 students working on obesity and on issues about obesity in children particularly. And I have a title for a book. I don't know if I'll ever write the book, but I think the title is brilliant. I love it. And it's called Powerful Minds in Flabby Bodies. And if one day I get bored with psychology, I'll write that book. I've collected masses of information to do so, but I don't know if I'll ever get around to it because psychology interests me more.
Right. So you know, you've seen psychology, and particularly developmental psychology, go through a number of transitions. What do you think the next wave is? Any idea of the next wave that you would like for it to go?
I think individual differences are going to become extremely important. We've focused a lot on group data, knowing full well that individual differences lie there, particularly in infancy.
Right.
I think it'll become increasingly interdisciplinary. So there's just no way you can just have blinkers on and do one thing. So you have to take into account genetics, you have to take into account cell biology, you have to take into account the endocrine system and cognition and behavior and the environment. And I think one of the things I see in the future is a much more subtle description of children's environments than we've had up to now. We did a study a few years back where we showed that just a tiny difference in the style of the mother's interaction with the baby would affect when the baby reached certain milestones. Mm-hmm. Of course, they were typically developing babies, so they all reached them in the end, but it shifted one way or another, just whether the mother was a little bit more directive or a little bit more sensitive.
Right. Right. So are there regrets, or are there ways in which you wish you may have done something differently, or lessons learned that you would be telling yourself, don't do that or do this?
Yeah, there are two things, I think. One is I wish I knew more about animal psychology. I wish I had the expertise to do the mouse experiments that my collaborators do. I find it's fascinating, and I've just been listening to Marla Sokolowski talk about fruit flies, and it's just amazing what you can do with an animal model. The other regret I have, and I've felt that quite often since I've been working on atypical development, is that I didn't have a clinical background that lay beneath the theoretical ideas, because clinicians know a lot and we can learn a lot from them, and I just don't have that background. And I think it's an important one if you're working on atypical development. I wouldn't want to just be a clinician, because I think that is also limited, but I wish I had both. And one or two of my colleagues do, and I think it's a very rich way to look at atypical development. Those are two regrets.
It's hard to balance everything. Anything you'd like to go back and say to Piaget? It sounded like it was a wonderful experience, different and different times.
It was amazing. I find myself quite often catching myself out thinking, oh, that's very Piagetian way of thinking. And I'm unaware sometimes that he just infiltrated my way of thinking. But I do want to stress the epistemology, not the stage theory and things like that. That for me is really quite secondary. But this view, you know, he really, in my view at least, anticipated epigenetics. Right. His notion of phenocopy, which everybody made fun of and said was ridiculous, was actually an understanding that mollusks could change the shape of their shells and pass that on to the next generation in terms of gene expression. And people laughed at him, and now everybody's super excited about it. So, you know, he had an amazing mind, amazing mind.
So, before I ask you sort of another advice question, I want to know, is there anything else that you would like to say? Or I know we could have conversations all day about your apartment in London and and your barn just outside of London, and your wonderful balance with family.
Yeah, I think London we have a tiny studio. My husband's very much taller than me, which is a good thing, so he has the cupboards above and I have the cupboards below. And we just about move around in this dance in our flat. And then on Thursday nights, we leave London after the rush hour and we go to a huge barn, which is where I held the party. And it's completely different life there. We're out in the country, we have a river. We both work all the time, but it's huge, so we have to phone each other if we want to speak from our two studies.
So I'm glad you
completely
said that,
the opposite.
Because we might picture this little red barn. No, this is a massive. I'm not sure why it's called a barn. Actually, it seems like
it's because it was a barn.
A nice estate.
They stacked hay in it before we converted it into a house.
With multiple additions, though, too.
Yeah.
Right.
So we have the best of both worlds. We're in London during the week. We go to the theatre often on a Wednesday or Thursday night before we go to the barn. And then we have this wonderful country life, and that's where I do most of my writing now. But it's a good life. No, I'm very happy.
It is lovely there.
Yeah.
Very lovely. So you really have been an incredible mentor over the years, to me as well. And I'm sure that there are young scientists who would like to know if you have any words of wisdom in our closing for how they can be successful too.
I think one really important thing is that you're enthusiastic. If you're not enthusiastic, it's not worth doing it. You have to really be bitten by a question, and you should have questions that challenge assumptions that people have. I think that's a really important thing, is to always go in there and think, could this be otherwise? And that's really exciting. It's frightening too, because you get into depth and sometimes it doesn't work. You have to work bloody hard, excuse my language, but if you want to succeed, you really have to work very hard. And I make a joke now and say, people say, have you retired? And I say, well, yes, I don't work 8 days a week anymore, I only work 7. But it literally, the most successful students I've had have always worked incredibly hard. And just be curious. It's like, I find it's like a detective story. You want to find out how this thing works, and you come at it from all different angles.
But you sound a little bit like a workaholic, Annette. So are you advising our young scientists?
No, because I said I took time off to paint my nails, and I take time off to go to the theater. But you have to organize your time much more carefully if you really want to get a lot of work out. And so
right.
I don't like the word workaholic, because it sounds as if you have nothing else in your life. And I went in for a poetry competition.
A what competition?
A poetry competition.
Oh.
So that took a little time out of my life. I go to the gym. I go very early.
So can I just ask you,
I don't know.
Did you? Oh, you don't know if you
I don't know
won
the result.
competition?
No.
Oh, so
I'll know in June, I think it is.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
We're all wishing you well on the competition.
I work out at in the pool. I do water jogging. I can't run anymore because of arthritis, but I certainly jog a lot in the water. So I organize my day. As soon as I come home, I don't waste time doing other things. So it's a question of really being very focused. I think that's
very focused, passionate. I think that you
yeah.
You seem to love all that you do.
I do. And I love the students I work with. They're amazing, absolutely amazing.
Well, and I think that that care that you put into mentoring them and being a role model, and your enthusiasm for the science, and to also talking to the media, and not making things stupid, but being clear has really been phenomenal. And I really just want to say how wonderful and lovely it's been to be able to interview you today, and to thank you very much for sharing with us.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.